thank you very much, David, for setting the scene.
Do you want a mic?
I don't know if I can get away without
Yes,
it.
please.
It's the button.
Oh, right, okay. Do you want me to have a mic? Yeah. It's too much technology with screen, pointer, and.
I'll do the laser if you need anything.
Okay, thank you very much.
Third hand.
So, thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk to you today about Normansfield. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I'm a textile conservator, worked as a conservator for many years. I've worked with many different types of textiles, but my areas of specialism are large painted banners, and I've also worked on a range of different types of theatre scenery. I now teach at University of Glasgow alongside my colleague Professor Christina Young, and I sort of focus a lot also on teaching pedagogy as well as this area of research and study. So I'm very happy to answer questions again at the end. What I'm going to give you today is sort of focus on the theatre scenery at Normansfield and give you a little bit of background to the theatre and discuss the scenery, which consists of over 100 items of painted stock scenery, ranging from large roll cloths, which you've seen already today, to small props. And I'll also describe some of the aspects of the conservation work. And I'm not going to go into too much technical detail about that, but if anybody wants to talk to me about that later, I'm very happy to answer questions. So you may have get a sense of scale from what David said, that the sort of from the initial significance of the theatre scenery collection to its conservation and subsequent digitisation has taken over 30 years, so it's a very long journey. A very exciting one. So, touched on by David, the theatre was part of Normansfield Hospital, which was established in 1868 by Dr. Langdon Down and Mary Langdon Down. Dr. Langdon Down was a pioneer in the care of people with learning difficulties, in particular Down syndrome. His approach focused on learning and encouragement of patients through a wide variety of activities, which provided opportunities for them to express themselves rather than merely being confined in an asylum environment. And it was different to many of the approaches at the time. It's his name that was chosen by the World Health Organization in 1965 as the standard accepted terminology for Down syndrome. In the grounds of the hospital, they had an entertainment hall, also known as Normansfield Theatre, and it was built in 1879. And it served as a chapel as well as an entertainment hall and included the staging of plays. They were performed by the patients and the staff, and it's the staff's ability to act, sing, play a musical instrument, which was considered when they were employed. And through their work, the Langdon Downs recognised the importance of the learning opportunities as well as the need for entertainment. So the Victorian Theatre is widely recognised as one of the most important private theatres in Britain, and it's Grade 2 listed. And as David mentioned, it was designed by architect Roland Plum in the arts and crafts style. And you can also see the painted gilded designs around the edge of the stage area. With a stage depth of 6.2 metres and a width of 5.5 metres, it's been described by John Earl as a theatre in miniature. The stage had limited fly space, so the scenery couldn't be lifted to change the scenes. It had a simple upper groove system fixed to the underside of the fly floors to hold the flats and wings in place. The backdrops and borders were hung from the upper part of the stage and lifted using a pulley system and lowered using a tumbling and unrolling action. The theatre is thought to be one of 2 examples with fully working mechanisms with this system of scene changing in the UK, which was common in many theatres in the 19th century. So going back to that sense of timeline, so some of these, thank you David for giving a bit more context as well. It's really nice to see those early pictures of you back in the early 80s. So The theatre was recognised for its significance in the 1980s, and a preliminary survey of the scenery was carried out by a team which included Colin Thompson and David Wilmot. As David's mentioned, Colin was the curator, at the Museum of London, and they created an inventory of the scenery. The hospital was still working at that time, but in 1987 it closed, and it took until 1987 for the Theatres Trust, supported by the Friends of Normansfield, to commission the Textile Conservation Centre to undertake a survey of the scenery. A team of conservators worked on site, documenting, cleaning and packing as many pieces as possible in a 6-week period, and submitted a report with initial proposals for future care. The conservation scenery and detailed assessment determined what survived, materials, construction, condition for each item, items that could be displayed, and to what state, whether that was display, use or stabilisation for storage. In 2001, the hospital site was purchased by Lang Homes, who undertook to restore the theatre and conserve the scenery as part of a package which included the development of the rest of the site for housing. And they commissioned the Textile Conservation Centre to carry out, as a consultancy, to carry out work on the future role and conservation needs of the scenery. The conservation methodology was based on that 1997 survey, and we suggested options for display, initial advice on storage, environment and long-term maintenance, as well as the costing for research concerning the conservation options. The idea of a digital resource was first proposed, and it's great to see how that exists now. And I think, thinking back to 2000, that was quite an early, ambitious idea. It seems very commonplace now. The methodology resulted in an agreed brief to conserve one set of scenery for static and reinstate it for static display on the stage, and make the rest of the items accessible for storage in specially constructed racking units housed in the basement of the theatre. Between 2001 and 2003, the scenery was moved off-site to an aircraft hangar in North London. It's obviously travelled quite a lot, this scenery, while the site was being redeveloped. The theatre and surrounding buildings underwent restoration and refurbishment. And then in 2003, research was carried out to define the conservation approach, and the work began in that same year and continued until 2005. And I worked on the project as project manager, but also conservator. So moving on, before we move on to sort of just think a bit more about the conservation work, I'd like to sort of go back to the scenery and just give you a bit more context here so that you can see some of the range of the pieces that are part of that collection. So as I mentioned earlier, it's scenery that includes over 100 items, and the majority of them date from about 1870s to 1909. And the scenery consists of backdrops, walk-through cloths, borders and flats. The fact that they belong to a hospital rather than a commercial or public theatre meant that much of it tended to survive rather than being replaced. And you can see here some of the sets. So we've got street scene, country cottage, woodland. There's also rocky ravine and the panelled room, which are used to create a variety of settings. The main collection includes 5 backdrops, 5 borders, 2 walk-through cloths and 48 flats, as well as other small props. The flats were painted onto canvases, nailed and glued to a wooden strainer, and they were slid on and off the stage to change the scenes. The canvases were not held extremely taut on the strainer, so flex when moved, and this had implications for conservation. Some also had profile boards, which you can see here, and you can see whether the wood extends beyond the extent of the frame. Some of the cloths are painted on both sides. This enabled the same flat to be used for different scenes. There's a good economy of space and resources, particularly in terms of storage. The rolled cloths are designed to be rolled and unrolled on the stage, so flexibility is essential. The backdrops were hung at the back of the stage, and they were nailed to a wooden batten at the top and had a tumble roller at the bottom, as mentioned, so it's rolling and unrolling. The borders were just nailed to a batten at the top, and the walk-through cloths combined a flat at the bottom and a rolled cloth at the top, and had doors which you could walk through once they're made. The scenery was collected over a number of years and from a number of different scenic artists, predominantly from London. So eminently only appears on the street scene and probably is painted the associated flats. It's possibly the oldest set, or the oldest one that was owned by Normansfield, because it appears on a contemporary souvenir of the opening of the theatre in 1887. Richard Douglas is thought painted some of the scenery, and his work is thought to date after 1888, and he's known to painted scenery for other theatres in and around London and as far north as Stockport. It's interesting when you look at the work from the company of J.T. Bull, because you can see that the name appears on many different sets, but also changes over time. From J.T. and J.G. to Bull on his own and to Bull and Sons. The company was listed in 1884 and still traded in 1902. J.T. Bull also made the false proscenium set, which was permanently on stage. No stamp was found that indicated the maker of this set, as the reverse was inaccessible because there were canvases on the back of the flats, and the header did not have any mark on it indicating the painter. So it was only when, during conservation, where we had to separate the canvas from the back, that we were able to find the name J.T. Bull stamped on the back of the flats. So that was a nice discovery to see that was who had made it. Very different style, also painted with a cocoa ribbon, you can see here. And this time it's working with G Bull as well. It was evident that many of the canvases were reused by different scenic painters themselves, and here you can see the name of Bull underneath the name of Douglas. So obviously passing canvases between themselves as well. There's also evidence of painted canvases being reattached and used as the backing for another canvas and then painted again on the other side. And on the right, you can see that not all of the work was necessarily done by scenic artists. Slightly more, probably an in-house piece of work. So. I'd now like to just go on and briefly touch on some of the conservation issues and challenges. As mentioned, we documented the scenery in 1997 and carried out a condition assessment, and this was done in collaboration with Peter Longman, who was former director of the Theatres Trust, John Earle, who acted as curator of the collection, and David, who was consultant for the stage machinery. You can start to see some of the conditions which we've touched on briefly, mentioned earlier. It was stored in less than ideal conditions. It was unprotected, stacked at the back of the stage. There was damage to the textile, to the paint, to the wood structural components. The paint was scuffed, scratched and abraded, the textiles were torn, the wood was split and broken. Paint layers were thin, and although it was generally well adhered, some was powdery, flaking, suffered damage through abrasion, use and handling, resulting in paint loss. So as part of the condition survey, basic surface cleaning was also carried out to remove the worst of the dirt and prevent it from becoming further engraved with textile and paint, which would lead to further damage before the scenery was packed and transported. And as you can see, there's water ingress, dust, as well as birdline. Birds made their way into the building. So this is some of the damage that you can see to the different components. Very typical of some of the things that we found. So, conservation options were investigated by paintings, objects and textile conservators, and the guiding decisions were informed by a number of different factors. The scenery was to be kept in the best conditions for future study within the existing theatre space. Although the scenery could not withstand operation, it was requested that a set be made for display, for static display on the stage. The flats needed to be stored stored accessibly, but accessible to researchers, but also exposed to limited vibration and handling. The size of the backdrops and the walk-through cloths meant that access to the wider public was really unrealistic. So 2 sets were identified to be conserved for the stage and the rest to be conserved for storage. And we've got, so the one set was the false proscenium set, which was to remain as a static part of the stage. And the street scene was selected because of its sort of its striking appearance and the fact that it appeared on the original opening of the theatre. So now we're going to a bit more technical detail. So fibre identification was an important first step to understand the nature of the materials and develop a conservation approach. The analysis confirmed that most of the cloth were made of flax, but also hemp. This was used for the false proscenium header. These are very similar fibres, but they age differently, and the hemp tends to be weaker. And we found this on the false proscenium header that was weak overall. The paint binder was also important, determined as part of developing the conservation treatment, and the paint was glue tempera with a protein binder. It was clear that the different scenery, it was really interesting how the different scenery, the paint had been used to create different effects. So on the false proscenium header, the paint was very lightly bound. It was applied directly to the textile with no ground layer and created this really rich, vibrant feel, and you really felt like it was almost a textile. It was really effectively done. But it also powdered very easily, so needed consolidation. The backdrops and flats had a ground layer and painted design applied on top. The layers were much thinner on the backdrops and the flats because they had to be flexible. They had to be able to roll. And the backdrop was generally in good condition, but there was still some crumbling in areas of the paint. The street frames, the flats were generally relatively stable, and although there was some abrasion, and there was also some crumbling of the paint resulting from the flexing. As mentioned earlier, the cloths were attached to strainers and they were designed to flex to some degree. On the street scene, some of the colours had been applied more thickly and there was a drying out of the medium leading to cracking. This caused cupping and delamination of the paint from the ground layers, exacerbated against by the flexing of the cloth. This was a challenge to stabilise, as the flats were also double-sided, so any solution presented some form of compromise. And it involved lots of debate with many painting conservators to try and work out what options we had in terms of stabilising that. So we did reach a compromise in the end. A lot of the theatre scenery dressed with fire-retarding solution, and this appears on many pieces of the scenery and are thought to have been applied after they were painted. There was concern that arsenic might be present, so tests were carried out, but luckily confirmed not to be evident. So the conservation was undertaken by a large team at the Textile Conservation Centre with help from the conservation students. It was important to stabilise the scenery whilst maintaining the characteristic appearance of the paint, the double-sided nature of the flats, as well as the flexibility of the cloth. This presented some challenging conservation issues which were addressed through extensive testing to carry out the most effective methods for the collection and the context. Dry cleaning, surface dry cleaning methods we used were safe and there wasn't the risk of damaging the paint. The cleaning was really quite limited because of the water-sensitive paints, but as you can see, the extent of the dust and the dirt on these flats really showed the significance of the soil that they were exposed to, so we were able to reduce that quite significantly. Red lead was identified on the false proscenium header, which again is hazardous, so gloves and masks were worn when handling this painted surface. And this needed consolidation, which we used isoglass to help stabilise the loose paint. The choice of consolidant helped us minimise any change to the paint, the appearance of the paint. There was also evidence of use and abrasion, but this was not imprinted, as might be more common in an easel painting. It was important to stabilise holes and areas of damage, and here you can see the false proscenium header, and it was damaged from heat from the stage lights. There was elements of wax as well on the surface, and it was very stiff. So they were treated using painted textiles or paper to support the areas. This became more problematic when we were supporting the double-sided cloths because we had to match both sides. So we developed ways of providing support on both sides and colouring the materials without trying to create too much bulk when we were creating patch support areas. Again, as we talked about, maintaining the flexibility, I think, was the biggest challenge in terms of supporting the large cloths. And the support fabric needed to be strong but lightweight. So the backdrop, the street scene backdrop, actually at that point was in quite good condition, and most of the damage was at the top edge, the lower edge where it would attached to the battlement and tumble roller. So we were able to provide a localised support. There was a lot of concern that if we had to provide a full support for that, it would have made it too heavy for it to actually roll and unroll. The false proscenium header, by contrast, actually, because it remained as a sort of static display and unrolled, we were able to give it a full support, which it did need. And it was supported on a fine linen using conservation grade adhesive, so we used Beaver 371. So we also had to tackle some of the wooden components which had split and been damaged. So these were re-adhered. The profile boards were re-adhered, but also sometimes we used strips of fabric to strengthen the backs of the boards. The metal also needed to be cleaned because it was quite rusty and consolidated to try and prevent further corrosion. We also had to do some stabilisation for some of the pieces that were going to be just in storage. So here you can see one of the cottage set with their lead windows, which are very nicely created from ribbons. So here they're stabilised just by encasing them just with net and stitch in place, just to hold them. It gives the effect when they're in storage, but it's not attempting to recreate or reproduce anything. And also some of the pieces were too large to come down to the centre for work, so work was carried out on site in terms of cleaning the backdrops. You can see the large team of conservators working on site, as well as working on the walk-through cloths where there were elements that had come unstitched, so they were stitched together. And likewise, David, I had brown hair at that point, so...
It's Normansfield that made us both grey.
That's what's done it over the years. So the size of the project, the handling of the scenery, the development of the sort of conservation was a huge challenge. But to see the scenery going back onto the stage was just a magical moment, and I can still remember that excitement. So here you can see the empty stage, and you can see a lot of the rolled cloth there. That's before they've been put away and treated, but they're basically there. You get a sense of the stage as well, quite a small size of the stage. And this is us lifting it into place. So you can see us having to angle the flats, turning them through 90 degrees to get them onto the stage. It was a huge undertaking, quite scary as well, just manoeuvring them. And you can see the flats also in place there with the backdrop, the act backdrop, and the street scene backdrop from the reverse there. And this is David lowering the street scene into place, or raising the street scene rather than lowering. And this is the stage with the static set on there. So it was fantastic. It was amazing to see it. You know, we'd only ever seen it flat. We'd not seen these pieces, you know, in their proper context before. So it was a very exciting day. So the roll cloths were stored at the back of the stage in a very large box, so they can be accessed. And you can see some of the large walk-through cloths at the back there, covered in Tyne, so that they are still accessible. And this is the storage for the flats, which you can see. And I know that some of you may be hoping to visit Normansfield, so you can access the collection. That gives you really good views of the scenery, and you're able to get very close to them. So time seems to be a factor, so 20 years on. So the scenery was on stage, on static display for a number of years. Despite its age, it was okay, but it was not really designed for long-term display on the stage because of its condition. Also, the Langdon Down Centre and Down Syndrome Association wanted to use the theatre more and more. So the scenery was being required to be taken on and off stage, which it couldn't really withstand that degree of handling. So in order for them to be able to use the stage more flexibly, the decision was made to take the original scenery off the stage and put it back into storage. And a facsimile of the 3 sets have now been made, including the street scene, and painted by Ross Robinson, a scene artist. In 2015, a collection survey was carried out. David and I returned to Normansfield to monitor the ongoing conservation needs. And overall, the scenery remains in quite good condition for its age. Probably a few more repairs needed, but generally good. The virtual theatre was created, so they've now during this visit, they photographed the rest of the backdrops, and they have created a virtual collection, so you can make your own stage scenery, which is a really nice way also of giving greater access to the collection. The museum has been closed since COVID, but is due to open in 2025. So hopefully it will make the access much more easy. But anyway, finally, I would just like to thank these people. There have been many more involved in the projects over a number of years, and it has been a real pleasure and really exciting to be involved and to be involved with it for so long. So, thank you very much.